She put a pot on she hair and gone. Them a the first one out on the dam. Basket on she head, bucket in each hand, hold up on she frack, I wanna she grandson. To the market, them a go. For the morning, the day is dawning. For Cockacrow to give the villagers a warning. Rise and shine, the birds them a sing. All animal take turn as them join in the waking. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Cockacrow, dagaba, donkey bray, horse and they even duck a quack. Come and hear this sweet story that tell the people about life in the country.
Good evening, everybody. Look, I must admit that this particular song, I don't know how you feel when you hear that song, President Granger, or those of you who are watching, but for some reason it takes me all the way back there, the Backdam quarantine, the water side, as we would call it. I don't know. It brings back lots and lots of good memories. Good evening. How are you, sir?
It's good to be back on the program, the Anansi Web Education, bringing these not fresh ideas, but important information to all the residents, all the citizens of our country. Because as we get older, we realize that things change, and we generate a lot of garbage, a lot of rubbish, and nowadays it's a consumption economy, and there's a lot of throwaway plastic, throwaway bottles, there's a lot of rubbers, tires, much more than when we were growing up. So we need to change in order to deal with the changing environment, the changing situation, and we need to keep our technology. We need to keep our garbage management practices up to date, or else our communities will be swamped. Our communities, maybe 50 or 60 years ago, used to be pristine. You could jump into a trench, you could fish, but nowadays you pass in some villages and you can smell the carrion, you can see the piles of waste, you can see the canals being silted up, and it is making life unhealthy for a large part of our population. So it's good that you should play this as your opening song, because it is not just nostalgia, it just doesn't remind us of the days, but it was a simpler society, it was a cleaner society. And I'm very glad you chose that song as your opening song, your opening theme. Life in the
Thank
country
you.
used to be clean and healthy.
Clean and healthy indeed. We're not seeing that.
All day a back down, me know I come home. Inaga, jackass yard for fetchy load.
All right, walking from the back down, ina get jackass cat for fetchy load. Ina get jackass cat for fetchy load. All right, tonight's topic, it's about garbage. Nothing politics, nothing political, just garbage. Uh, Garbage we're talking about tonight. And so on Anansi Web Education, your topic is garbage. So sorry about that if some politicians are watching, but garbage, and explores explanations for the PPPC's disregard for its inescapable executive obligations to protect the environment. They're not doing that. We know that. We see what it was under them. Yeah, this is the dump site. This is around Stabrook Market area. This is called Donkey City. And that is right in front of a police outpost, a police mobile outpost. And the evidence, all of it, it's right there. Under the PPP regime, disregard for the environment, they just do not care. So the first question, President Granger, because you see, it's because of garbage, the topic, and I'm making that link. We're making that link as to why the PPP has total disregard for our environment. So the first question, why? And we start off with the why. Why is the efficient collection and disposal of garbage essential to future generations?
It is just like asking, why is good health? essential to future generations. Uh, well, the PPP mentality, I think, is effectively echoed in a statement made 15 years ago, which I refer to as the Kellowan effect. And it is inescapable that the PPP has a certain attitude to municipalities which it doesn't control. And what Kelvin actually said, is that, or what the Kelvin effect states, is that, it would be good to have a health crisis because you could blame the other party, presumably the PNC, because they would be responsible for the health crisis. So even though the central government is starving municipalities of funds, and that the result would be a health crisis, it would be a good thing because you could blame the other side. And as far as they're concerned, the whole purpose of politics is to blame the other side. But in fact, to answer your question, um, uh, efficient collection and disposal of garbage is essential to future generations because it is a question of health. And if you look to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we want our children to grow up in a clean, safe, and healthy society. We want to ensure that water is clean. Well, nowadays people wouldn't dare, drinking water from canals, but 50 years ago, it was not a problem. You could drink water from the rivers or the canals in Guyana anyway. But we want to make sure that there's clean water, that our communities are sanitary. We want to make sure that our households, our neighborhoods, our villages are clean and healthy, and they're not breeding grounds for vectors like mosquitoes. So to protect us from dengue and malaria, we want to make sure that our children live in communities and societies which are sustainable. And even though they want to drink aerated drinks or they eat food, fast foods, those products could be packaged in sustainable containers so that at the end of it, they could be destroyed sustainably and they don't go into the canals and foul up our societies. So it is not a question of consuming or not consuming. The question is how we manage the materials that we're consuming in huge quantities.
Yeah.
You would say that when you were growing up, you probably didn't buy fast foods on the street. You probably, ate at home, when you're going to primary school. So what I would say now is that we have a greater responsibility because the climate is changing and the volume of materials that we use in the household is increasing. So there's increasing and the increasing variety. And some of the stuff, some of the soft drink bottles, aerated drink bottles, cannot be recycled. So they go into the canals and they create the garbage that we're trying to get rid of. And especially in light of climate change, we need to consider our consumption habits. We need to protect our landscape. So to answer your question, efficient collection is essential to our generation and also to the future. In my life, I've never seen so much garbage. And if we are to protect future generations from these mountains, I suppose, in time to come, Ayangana will be superseded by some of these mountains of garbage because they're popping up in every single region. And if we are to give our children a future, we need to have a new look at the way garbage is not only collected, but the way it is processed and disposed of. And I think that the Calawan effect is preventing the central government from thinking reasonably and sensibly about how we deal with this. It's a modern phenomenon. It's a modern phenomenon of production. Instead of taking your own plate and spoon and so on, you get plastic spoon, plastic plate, plastic bottles, and just throw it away when you finish. But I don't think many households half a century ago would have used or would have generated so much waste as is happening now. So efficient collection and disposal of garbage is important for the future generation. And I don't think this generation has the option of bequeathing to our children and grandchildren these mountains of garbage. It's unfair to them. They didn't cause it. We are the cause of the waste, and our government is not helping matters at all.
Certainly not helping matters at all. In fact, in most instances, sorry, maybe the government is contributing toward what is happening, the lawlessness and the disregard for the environment. Second question is to the who, and that is who is likely to suffer first and to suffer most from the buildup of, you know what, garbage.
I think our children will suffer. Our children do not have spaces to play and to swim and to have sport anymore. It is shrinking. And when you look at the landscape after Easter Monday kite flying, you see the waste, the plastics and the food boxes. And when you look at the canals where children would be seen, or even ducks and animals will be seen bathing in the water. Nowadays, this is shrinking, even in the hinterland. Sometimes the rivers used to be so clean and pristine, but now they're being overtaken with coconut shells and other forms of waste. So our children are forced to suffer because the areas that used to be reserved for sport and play are shrinking. And it gets worse if the municipalities and the councils are not enabled to dispose of the garbage efficiently. So I am thinking about future generations. It's all about the future. And we're building mountains that used to be big open spaces and mountains of garbage. And nobody could play there. Nobody could live there. The stench and also the possibility of fires. In fact, at one stage when the main landfill site was in the eastern part of La Penitent of the Repentier, there were frequent fires, that used to break out, and it was a huge danger. I've seen families living in Princess Street having to block up their windows because of the stench, and even when the stench passes, the smoke from the fires would penetrate into the houses. So it is a time bomb. These huge mountains of garbage are a time bomb, and I think we all will suffer. But I think about our children first, suffer first, and they suffer most because the older generation will depart, and the children will have the mess to clean up if they could clean it up at all.
That is so true. If they could clean it up at all after all of this, compliments of, compliments of a government that doesn't care. So it takes us now to the third question, which is what? And what are the underlying motives behind the PPPC's indifference to garbage collection?
This is a very baffling question because there are people in the PPP who like to boast about their championship of the environment, but how could they be proud of this environment? It's nasty, it's filthy, it's dirty, it stinks. And what is there to boast about? There's no point beautifying this part of the seawall or beautifying some waterfront. The problems are right in front of our eyes, and we need to accept that there is a collective responsibility on the part not only of the government but also of the local government, the regions, neighborhoods, and the villages to keep the areas clean. And now, why is the PPP indifferent? The PPP is indifferent because of its mindset. This is what they call, the Kelwan effect. They feel it is good politics to punish municipalities and NDCs, which are not red areas. They're not supporting the PPP. These are green municipalities. Georgetown is a green municipality. Linden is a green municipality. New Amsterdam is a green municipality. So let's squeeze them, because this is not a matter for Guyana and how Guyana looks and smells. This is a matter of PPP victory. So the garbage is a battlefield in which, the PPP can win by showing that the PNC or the APNU administered municipalities are inefficient. This is all about carbonization of the environment. That is to say, that you stifle, everyone knows that no municipality, no neighborhood could have the means, the money, the manpower to keep the environment clean, especially now in the modern era when there's so much garbage, there's so much bottles, so much plastic, so much used tires. So they all need help. And the central government is just starving them of giving them little spoonfuls of money. It is never enough. And what I would recommend, there is some, just like you have a national drainage and irrigation authority, you have a national solid waste authority, which is responsible countrywide. Take the responsibility from the municipalities if you want, if that is what you want, instead of giving them, work to do which they can't, don't have the means to do. Set up a national solid waste authority. So all over the country, the central government will take, just like the central government takes responsibility for drainage and irrigation, NDIA, that central government take responsibility for solid waste management. But it is unfair to continue to blame the municipalities for work that they're not capable of doing. Things have changed from 50 years ago. And I think the PPP is actually deliberately, starving. We now have more funds than ever before over the last 5 years since we became a petroleum state. We now have funds. Why use the funds to beautify, one or two little places? Why not deal with the central problem, which is solid waste management? So I'm deeply concerned about the effect that this policy is having on our communities. And I would say that the underlying motives is to show that the APNU, PNC administered local councils cannot maintain the sanitary requirements or cannot establish proper sanitary requirements in the areas of their responsibility. That is a fact, because they don't have the means and the manpower, and the central government is starving them of funds. That is the reason for the PPP's mindset. And what Kellowan Lal said, years ago, is what is now taking place now. It's a fact that without the funding, without the assets, without the resources, we're going to have a health crisis. And then the PPP will be able to both, this was caused by the PNC, but it isn't true. It is caused by the PPP's mindset and the policy of starving the NDCs, the green NDCs and the green RDCs and the green municipalities. That is what is happening.
That's what's happening indeed, starving the municipalities, the green ones especially, and so that all these diseases, well, they never care. They're not concerned about it. They continue to be, cold-hearted on this particular issue for obvious reasons, mind you, for obvious reasons. All right, so the next question is on where in Guyana are the effects of the garbage accumulation most critical?
Well, it's again, there's a bit of a difficulty responding there because it is a pervasive problem countrywide. But most, I will respond to that word most. That I would say the urban areas are most affected. Don't forget, we now have, as a result of the initiatives of the APNU administration, we now have 4 additional towns, Mabruma, Bartica, Letem, and Madia. So these townships, because they attract larger populations, an increased level of commercial activity generate more waste. So they need more help. I would say that every township, um, um, in the first instance, and also in the second instance, every NDC needs to have its own solid waste management facility. So I would say countrywide, we need to pay attention first to the towns. But in a case like the Higgs Bosch in Region 4, just outside Georgetown, well, it's in Greater Georgetown, I would say that when you look there, it is a collection area for 25 NDCs. So it is not just one city, it is everything between Parika and Mahaika. Just look at the map and see what we're talking about, all the way up river to Temeri. Um, so these well, it's not a conurbation, but when you look at areas like Durban, like Diamond, and so on, and the new housing areas outside of Georgetown, between Temeri and Georgetown, you see that these areas need special attention. So I would say that it's a countrywide problem, but we need to deal with the towns first because those are the areas of greatest stress, greatest pressure. We also need to deal with our waterways. Our waterways are important to our fisheries, they're important to our health. Um, and we also need to deal with the technology of building these land sites. Some of these landfills are not proper landfills, they're dumps, dump sites. There's no effort. Even if you look at the picture you're showing, you see glass, you see plastic, you see wood, you see stone, you see metal. Modern days, in modern communities, the garbage has to be separated. So garbage from food generated by the hotels and restaurants and the farms, decaying vegetable matter could be separated and composited. Others could be recycled, but I don't know that there are recycling facilities in Guyana for the volume of plastics that we generate. And then, of course, you have dumb policies of allowing the importation of used tires. Used tires are just what the word said. They're used tires, and the life is limited. They come into Guyana to go into the landfills because somebody thinks some people think they might be making money, but in fact it is a self-defeating policy that it is difficult to get enough life out of those used tires and out of recycled products. Better to buy a new product so it will last longer and it wouldn't go into the garbage dump in a hurry. But that is what we're looking at. We're really on a time bomb, and we need to change our attitude. And the central government has a responsibility to lead the way. So I would say, quite frankly, in response to your question, that the motivation of the PPP is really quite absurd in a modern era. I do not know any developed country which boasts about its environment, which is blessed with the sort of beautiful and bountiful environment that Guyana is blessed with, which allows so much filth to besmirch the landscape. It is really a shame, and that people should go around the world boasting about being champions of the environment, when in fact they're doing everything possible to prevent the environment from being cleaned up, simply because some municipalities are green municipalities and they are red government. So you'd find that the benefits are going to red areas, areas controlled by the PPP. But once they feel that an area or municipality is controlled by a green administration, well then you would see the Kelvin effect coming into play. So I would say that the PPP's indifference is not really indifference. It is PPP policy to squeeze, the green and neighborhoods and the green councils. That's my view.
Sorry about that. Thank you so much, President Granger. It takes us now to the where. And we're dealing about garbage. And you notice talking about garbage and the PPP. And as we have said, that they disregard by the PPPC administration for the inescapable executive obligations to protect the environment. Garbage. Oh, okay. Let's go now to the where. Where in Guyana are the effects of garbage accumulation most critical?
Garbage accumulation is not just unsightly, it is essentially a health matter. When the rain falls, and Guyana is notorious for its heavy rainfall in some areas, more than the Caribbean, there is something called leaching. And when you have unsorted garbage, um, vegetable matter, decaying matter, sometimes carrion, all of this doesn't disappear. The water continues to percolate and it gets into the groundwater system. So when you have these huge accumulations, I remember a few years ago at Bartica, you can smell the dump. It's not a landfill, it's a dump site a kilometer away. So you can imagine what happens to people living in that neighborhood day and night. And then, of course, there are fires because some of the material which is dumped, you know, after a long period of time, the heat would, you know, would ignite fires, what they call spontaneous combustion. And there would be smoking. Sometimes they're active fires. Sometimes they'll be smoking day after day. And this is a health hazard for shut-ins and old folk living in those neighborhoods. So you have problems of the pollution or contamination of groundwater. You have air contamination from the stench, and you have actual possibilities of fires. Now, because of the methane and other noxious gases generated in these landfills and dump sites, you know that there's something here that could be used, but PPP does not introduce the measures needed or the technology needed to make use of those dump sites and landfills, so that the methane could be used to generate electricity. So in fact, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because of the PPP's indifference to garbage collection and disposal and sorting. So that is exactly what is happening. The underlying motives I would say what is happening is an unintended consequence of the Kelouan effect. It's unintended, but in fact, people are suffering because they're trying to punish the green NDCs and the green RDCs, the green municipalities. It's not working. This red-green conflict isn't working. It isn't benefiting our people. It is hurting everybody. Nobody wins.
Certainly, no one wins indeed. And so the second to last question has to do with which agencies in the PPPC administration are responsible for environmental protection. And probably, obviously, we are seeing that there's no evidence that anything is being done, anything, not at all. But which agency, sir?
Overall, I would say the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development has the single greatest responsibility. No point blaming the EPA and other subordinate agencies, but the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development. And in terms of enforcement, you can ask the Ministry of Health has a responsibility. You can say the Ministry of Education has a part of the responsibility. You can even say the Ministry of Home Affairs has a part of the responsibility. But centrally, the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development has the greatest responsibility, because they feel that if there was a proactive policy from that ministry, it could, now that we have, capital towns in the hinterland, the regional chairman, the chairman of the RDC, could call in these various subordinate agencies, health and local government and so on, around the table and plan policies But there must be a guiding national policy. That's why I'm calling for a national solid waste management agency. And then you can have the force of law, because some of these other agencies, like the EPA, do not have coercive arms. So when you see people deliberately dumping garbage or litter, there is no real way of bringing it to an end. So the Ministry of Education needs to get on board, so that at the level of the schools, the churches, the communities, these places should be spick and span. But it cannot be done alone. And the agencies now have to adopt a friendly attitude, not a hostile or offensive attitude. They have to adopt a friendly attitude to ensure that there is real, I would say, inclusionary democracy. This is what the Constitution calls for, Article 13. So we should get people in our neighborhoods, in our NDCs, around the table, decide how our communities will be protected. And the Ministry of Local Government has to take the lead. It's not a war between PNC and PPP. It's not a battle between central government and local government. It is something for all Guyanese to have a clean and beautiful country. And I would say that the central government has to take the lead, and people who call themselves champions of sanitation, champions of the environment, and champions of greenness should take the lead in making sure that we live in a safe, clean, and healthy country.
So true. Safe, clean, and healthy country. Safe, clean, and healthy country. Good night to all of you who are watching, wherever you're watching us from. Whether you're currently Starbuck Market area, you know how it was like, and under the PPP regime, that is. And you saw the difference when the coalition got into office. Oh, yes, we all saw the difference. Final question tonight, President Granger. How can the PPPC administration implement a country-wide garbage collection plan? Uh, I'm, I want to hear your answer to this. How? Because they've had 23 years. They've never done that. They're now going into 5 years. They haven't paid any attention to that. And so the question again is, how can the PPPC administration implement a countrywide garbage collection plan?
The PPP is wedded to confrontation and conflict. It is not a party of consensus and cooperation. So it calls for a real ocean change. It calls for a change in mindset in the way they view politics. They see politics as being conflict. They don't see politics as being consensus. And that's one of the reasons why, APNU was superior, even though there were some disadvantages. APNU went into a coalition. The PPP is not going to go into coalition. They've said so over and over again. It's their way or no way. And there has to be a change in mindset. Now, apart from that, from a technical point of view, an administrative point of view, I do firmly believe that we must elevate solid waste management to the level of a national crisis. Just as we have a national drainage and irrigation authority, and everybody who's gone through a flood knows the importance of the NDIA. Just as we have a Guyana Water Authority, we need to have a national solid waste authority. So countrywide, we don't just give out a few bits of money and a few front-end loaders to this NDC or that NDC. We accept responsibility. That's a national problem, and that's the next step that the PPP should take. Um, we then have to ensure that the policy of reducing, reusing, and recycling is embedded in our education system, embedded in all our government policies, so that we stop importing these, used tires. We stop importing, unserviceable equipment, and trying to rehabilitate it, and we stop, allowing, these SUPs, single-use plastics, ban plastic bags. Anyone wants to bring a plastic bag must pay through the nose. There's some countries, even developing countries, third world countries, you cannot enter the country with single-use plastics because the single-use plastics only have one destination. That is a dump site or a landfill. So the PPP needs to introduce these policies um, in order to ensure that solid waste is brought under control. No, they need to incentivize, solid waste management. That is their incentives. That is people who uh, desist from polluting the environment would be given incentives. Now, if you go to the supermarket, carry your own shopping bag, carry your reusable bag, and you get a bonus. This happens in 2 or 3 stores in Guyana. You actually get a bonus if you do not take plastic. And there is an incentive for not using plastics in a few places, not enough. So it has to be incentivized. And people who reduce waste, reuse, and recycle garbage should be given some incentive so it pays them to follow these 3 R's: reduction, reuse, and recycling, so that they diminish waste. There must be investment in garbage collection. That is, people would be able to buy bins. Everybody should have a bin. I mean, there's some countries in the Caribbean where if no bin, no collection. So there needs to be some investment so that every household, every restaurant, every store, every hospital, every clinic will have bins. So the garbage collection companies or the garbage collection agencies don't have to go into yards and deal with the dogs or go into some unspeakable areas. The bins are accessible, and there must be a bin culture. There must be a bag culture so that the bags could be removed from the bins and taken away. So there needs to be the implementation of a public education program. Uh, and I would like to see, in every classroom, a garbage bin for waste paper or for other waste in every restaurant, in every tuck shop, in every fast food place, in every stall in the market. There should be bins for waste. So the waste doesn't get into the canals and the trenches and it's not dropped on the roadside. And there needs to be an education program. So from the time a child goes to nursery or primary school, that child knows that there's only one place that the waste must go, that is in a bin. And there must be innovative techniques. My friends, garbage collection is now a modern science that people could separate garbage and reuse some types of garbage rather than allow it to go into the garbage bin, into the landfills. And you can do this by recycling and reusing some of the waste. And you'll be surprised that even in the very developed countries, which you think are rich, you go to places like California, you will see that sewage would be coming in one end and drinking water is going out the other side. This is all stuff. This is not new technology. For Guyana is innovation. But finally, there must be enforcement. There must be, the laws are there, the regulations are there, the agencies are in place, but they need to have robust enforcement agencies which just punish litter, which just punish when you go by some supermarkets or some commercial places, you can just see who's dumping garbage and you just haul them off to the courts and make them pay and they'll stop. So the law needs to be invoked to protect our society. So these are the measures, these are the things that the PPP can do or should be doing in order to protect our country. It has a constitutional obligation. It is not a favor that they're doing this municipality. It is an obligation. There's obliged to protect society from pollution and contamination and protect this generation and future generations. And I'm afraid, well, not I'm afraid, I can tell you, PPP is not doing what it is required to do under the Constitution. It is time for the PPP to accept its obligation. Every region, every neighborhood, every village, every town, and protect our population, this and future generation. This could be a beautiful country if if the PPP administration thought of protecting this pristine environment that we inherited from our forefathers.
Well said, President Granger. Thank you. Let's not hold our breath, though. It's not going to happen under the PPP regime. And I'm just saying because the evidence is there, they're just not interested in doing that at all. And tonight's topic is garbage. That's why we dealt with garbage and garbage and garbage, and the fact that the PPPC is incapable of doing anything. They have basically, as we said, disregard for its inescapable executive obligations to protect the environment. Shame on the PPPC. President Granger, thank you so much for your time, and to all of our listeners, wherever you are, whether you're in Guyana, outside of Guyana, continue to have a good night, rest of the night, and be blessed. Specifically, they got some folks on the quarantine who are watching, and say hi, guys on the quarantine. Auckland Village, somebody from Auckland wants to talk. I knew I would have gotten your smile here, President Granger. But thank you so much, as always, for your time. Give my regards, and to the former First Lady, Sandra Marie Granger. Thank you. And we're still waiting to see a photograph of your kitchen garden. We're still waiting. We want to see you in that kitchen garden. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night. Let's keep our country clean.
Thank you. Take care, guys. See you next week. Same place, same time.
Back over shoulder, running by his side, a Rexy and Rover from the farm, them a come. So now go